And just as Ken gets going here, before he jumps into it, the slides are available. There's a couple of additional resource slides and other things towards the end of that before the walkthrough slide that we were looking at previously. Some of it goes into like writing a report and findings, things we like to see in those. That's going to be very dependent on the organization that you're dealing with, like how much detail they want in that. But the biggest thing, at least externally, that I see is make the recommendations as close to code quality as possible, right? So if you can implement a recommendation or recommend something that actually can be implemented in code, do it. As a developer, I appreciate that. If somebody gives me, a pull request that actually fixes the problem. So as a security person that knows code, like, why not do the same thing if we have access to the code, right? Obviously, it's still got to be tested and everything else that goes into it, but at the very least, give them a place to start. So, Ken, anything else on that before you go into VTM?
No, sir. Well, I guess, if you have, like, I'm going to probably ask questions. Well, not probably, I'm definitely going to ask questions, and feel free to just speak up. The way this Zoom thing is set up, it's hard for me to just go back and like look for raised hands and all that stuff. So I'm fine with you just like shouting out. It doesn't bother me or whatever. So, yeah. Anyways, that's all I had, Seth. I'll go right into it then. Cool. Okay. So, yeah, we're going to do a walkthrough together. We're actually going to do a little mini assessment together, and we'll start that now. So I've already copied in and pasted in the note-taking template. So that's where we'll start. The very first thing always needs to be get that commit number. So I'll get the last commit number, and that'll be my reference point for everything else. By the way, for these notes, they will be posted up into the handouts repo. So you'll be able to take a look at what we've done afterwards as well, if you want to reference it later. So what does it do from a business perspective, this VTM application? So the first thing I'm obviously going to do, since I don't have a whole lot to go on here, is look at the README. This is all I have is the code base. So I'm going to go right in here. It's a little hard, obviously, to tell just from this first README, but it says it's an intentionally vulnerable task manager. I'll take the intentionally and vulnerable part out, and we'll just call it a task manager app. So it does some sort of task management. I can't see. Hold on, let me just, okay. First, okay, there we go. All right, I've got it now, so I can see the actual
if there's
chat.
an important thing in the chat, one of us will read it out loud to you. You don't have to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, stick with it. We can do that. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Now, remember too, like, one thing to note is that this may not all be like, this isn't sequential, right? We're going to, and as I had mentioned yesterday, as you go through the assessment, you're going to keep coming back to this. You're going to learn new things about the tech stack, about its behavior, even risks. You're going to come back and you're going to, as you do your review, you're going to find more stuff, and you're going to come back to these notes. So, but for now, we'll kind of try to stick to that. So, who does it do it for? Internal or external customer base? A little tough to figure that out right now. I'm just going to go into this README and take a look at a few things. MySQL admin, so probably some MySQL here. Looks like the language is going to be Python version 3. That's helpful to know. I'm going to write all this down here in a second. They're using virtual environment. Got a requirements.txt. That's something we'll look at to see if it gives us any clue into, like, major libraries and functionality and features of this app. There's some test data. It looks like load data. So seed data. So I'm definitely going to take a look at that. That's always interesting. It gives you kind of a good idea of how things are laid out logically. And then just some instructions on what to do once it's running. Cool. So, and we will run it. So this is one thing too, we kind of barely touched upon it yesterday, but there's really 3 major categories of reviews. There's pure static review, where you don't have a running application at all. There's hybrid review, which has a static analysis component to it with either validation or just more accessibility, either having run the application locally, or if you have the application running in staging environment. So like something I'm certain Seth has seen is folks will have like, hey, it's too complex to get it running locally, but look, we've got it up in staging. You have the source code. Using those two things, you could tie it together. The third is not anything to do with static analysis at all. It's just doing dynamic runtime review. But obviously, we're going to go with a hybrid approach since we have a running application. It'll speed things up. But going back to this, let's go back to our notes since we learned a little bit about the tech stack. So we know that it's Django. We know that it's Python 3. Or actually, do we know that it's Django? We don't. So let me go to, now we do. All right, Django, cool. Got some stuff there in our requirements.txt, but so Django, I forget the version already. I think it's like 3 something. Python 3. Looks like there was some MySQL here. So we know we're going to put in our brainstorm of risks, like our brainstorming, like just because it's possible there's some SQLi because it is MySQL. Here back up, Python 3. What else did we learn from that? So we've got virtual environment. I don't think that's super important to list. Okay. So not too much more that I'm kind of getting out of this, except for, there is this seed data, which I'm going to take a look at here. So if I have to go to Task Manager, fixtures, there are some JSON fixtures here. And this is going to be used as our seed data. So we've got auth group. So primary key 1, auth group. Permissions are assigned numerically, it looks like here. And the name of that is admin G. I assume that's the name of that group. Primary key 2 has different permissions, lesser permissions, or project managers. And there's team members. Okay, so we got team members, project managers, and admins so far. For now, I'll probably go, there should be a section here about roles. Yeah, all right. Admins, team members, and project managers. I think that's what it said. Does that sound right, Seth? I honestly have to look.
Yep,
yeah, okay.
That's right. Yep.
Cool. I'll keep looking through this data here. So groups.json. Oh, same thing as before. But so this one is the actual permissions and this is the actual groups. Okay, cool. So we got groups, and if we ever need to reference, I don't know what those numeric permission numbers mean at all, but we can figure that out. Okay, so this is Task Manager notes. These always crack me up, Seth, these things you added in there. So these are just basically, it looks like notes. Ooh, that's fun. Cool. Someone try to cross. Oh, a little more cross-site. Oh, this is cool. That's cool. But this is just seed data, so I'm just curious about what it looks like. So it's basically just notes that have primary keys and some data attached to it. Oh, but there is an image portion here. Image. Okay. That's kind of interesting. Note that I don't need I don't feel the need to go and just note this down yet. It's fine. I'm just kind of doing a little cursory exploration here, learning a little bit more about the application. So there's notes. It looks like there's notes, projects, and tasks. They relate to each other. So this is a project that has users assigned to it, has these attributes with it. So project. So wait, if I go back to, okay, I'm guessing that, so if I go here, I bet, yeah. Okay, I see. So these tasks are associated with these projects. I can tell that because I was trying to figure out like how the, associations work between notes, projects, and tasks. But if you look, you can see that there's like this project attribute under the task manager tasks. So immediately I'm kind of realizing, okay, that it looks like the tasks belong to a project number, and that's the association. And well, so then I'm guessing that notes, not clear to me yet how notes, like what, oh, it's a task. I see. So, okay, I see. So the notes attached to a task and the task associate with a project. Okay, so projects is the top level, tasks are the second level, and notes are the third level. And I can tell that because I'm kind of using these attributes as like associate. You can tell that they're associations with the seed data. So far, nothing super interesting here, just that they're, I think the image thing is the one thing I'm interested in. Like, how does the image get there? That's definitely going to make a difference. Is it uploaded or something like that? Because obviously uploads have some interesting features. But right now I'm going to go back to my notes, and just so I don't lose track of this, I'm going to write that all down. What we just looks like tasks, or sorry, projects, tasks, notes. At least that's the cursory. So like, if I'm brainstorming things like, I don't know exactly what are going to be in these notes or tasks or whatever, but one thing I'd be curious about is like, could there be sensitive information stored just from a risk perspective? Like, could there be sensitive information stored with these projects and their associated data, right? So this is actually more of a question mark than an answer, but it's worth taking a note because like I need to figure that out. If we know that tasks and notes have like sensitive data, or even projects have sensitive data in there, then we have to start looking at like, okay, what fields have sensitive data, and then what are we doing there? Since we just talked about cryptographic review, like, do we need to do things at rest need to be secured? Like, what precautions do we need to take? But let me go back over to now a different seed file, which is users.json. And let's see here. So, okay, so we've got primary key, the model it belongs to, so auth.user. User permissions. I wonder if these permissions relate to the permissions we saw with the projects or tasks. I can't remember which one. Or auth groups. Auth group permissions. I guess we'll figure that out as we go through this stuff. But anyways, we see that there's like a user permission field, clearly takes an array of some data or a list in Python, whatever it's called, I forget. Is staff, so there's an is staff role, that's interesting. Super user role. We see an admin at TM. Same sort of thing. This is interesting. Cool beans. Huh.
Super secure.
Yeah. Super. I guess what I would do here is go down to my brainstorming risks. I would say noted that there is some, or there noted the use of what looks like MD5 in the seed data for users.json. So that's something we need to call out. Going down. Okay, so these are the group associations, or it looks like a group association. So I'm going to guess that if you're assigned a group, it's probably this groups.json bit, which then has its authorization permission stuff in this auth group permissions file. So to reiterate, I think a user has a group permission, and that group permission has its own set of permissions per each group. If that makes any sense. But by the way, I am going to go and just like note that there are the is staff and is super user in our notes for the roles, because that's like just interesting. So all right. Sweet. So gonna go back and see if there's anything. One thing I'm trying to figure out is like, is this all internal users? So far, it looks like just an internal user type thing. So we do have a different group 3 with a external email address. So it does look like they are expecting external users as well. Obviously, we would verify that with the company, and it'd be honestly part of our scoping. If we were consulting, it'd be part of our scoping. If it was, part of an internal thing, we'd just ask folks. But just going through the code, I can kind of tell. So if you're in group 3, it's probably a situation where you're an external. That's not necessarily true. Okay, so we see a group 3 with an internal email address. This brings up actually an interesting point, is the risk profile is actually a little bit elevated now, because you have a mixture of potentially this product being used by the same people that are developing on it, like similar to what I do at GitHub, right? We actually use GitHub, but we also work on GitHub. It's probably a similar thing that actually raises the threat profile a little bit, definitely changes the risk profile, just because now, any compromise of this application might also lead to a compromise of the people that have built this application and exacerbate the situation. So I am going to note this under internal and external customers. So appears to do both, elevates the risk of a compromise affecting more than just customer data. So are there any questions? Let me look at the chat real quick to make sure there's nothing. Yes, it's a security feature that Gusto no longer runs on Gusto. The VTM repo, if that's what you're asking, yes, that can be checked out. I believe I think that's publicly accessible. But Seth, I'd defer to you to put in the link to that if that's the case. Cool.
Oh, it is. It's publicly accessible. That's fine. Yep.
Oh, hey, that's not good or good, depending on how you look at it. But that's interesting. Maybe I shouldn't say good or bad. It's interesting that there's a date of birth there. Also, some images. So cool. That's awesome. I'm gonna guess, yeah. So there's probably like some upload download functionality. So now we've got to worry about the traditional sort of file upload download traversal web shelly type stuff that we would normally have to think about. So I need to go back to this and make note of that. Just going back up to these, and then what is it? Okay, so going back over, and then the data that it stores. So what information will it hold? Date of birth. All right. Okay. Just going to continue perusing through this. And yeah, we're really just getting to know the application. I mean, honestly, it's going to sound weird, but like, I actually had an assessment one time where it was of just a gigantic monolith, a Rails app, but like I could actually tell that it was former Java and .NET developers that had written it. And when I actually asked them, like the background of the developers, it turns out I was right. And that's how it like, it's this weird thing of the more you go to review code, the more you start to actually like kind of understand the person that wrote it or the people that wrote it. I don't know. It truly is like profiling. It's very strange. At least that's my like hot take or whatever, in my opinion. All right, so we've gone through the fixtures so far, I think pretty well. I want to go back to this checklist and take a look at some things. So one other thing I want to look at is the requirements file again, because I actually don't know what any of these things, I mean, I know what MySQL client is in Django, but I have no idea. And I mean this legitimately. Is this new since I don't remember us even looking at this before, Seth. So that's
I can neither confirm nor deny. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
I don't know.
But yeah. PyTZ, it does time zone. Yep.
Okay. Then I'm not going to worry about that too much. Screen.
So currently you're Googling each of the requirements, which
I wouldn't normally do that for what it's worth.
That's what I was going to ask. Because like if we brought you into our app, you'd spend a year.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't normally do that. But this is because, like this is just a small app. Normally what I would do is I'd actually look for things that are, and also like, to be fair, I also like after a while of having reviewed a bunch of apps, kind of know which things are like pretty much what they do. And it's usually when it's something that I'm unfamiliar with, but I can like, basically if it has some level of risk, it might introduce. So if it's doing some CSV parsing, then it may not be that the CSV parser is the problem, but what it might indicate is that there's an ability to produce CSV or someone uploads CSV, and then we have to worry about like say CSV injection. So knowing what these libraries do, it's not necessarily like that I'm looking for all of the risks. I'm just trying to figure out like what all I can gain in terms of knowledge about how this application is meant to behave. When I see like the in-memory database or adapters, when I see things to work with LDAP, when you see things to work with, like I said, some XML or CSV or, serialization libraries, these all drastically change the risk and the threat profile and what the things are that you're going to add to your checklist to look for. But this is just because I haven't seen this. So I'm just kind of like, what are these things? And it's small. This is to create spreadsheet files. So actually, since we're talking about it, there may be, okay, interesting. So there actually might be the very thing that I was just talking about. I don't even know what that is at all. ASCII ref Python. The standard Python. Oh, okay, that's probably not super important. So this is kind of the only one that really sticks out to me. Oh, and you've got this Django Excel. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just put into our notes about the tech stack and third-party components. XLT looks like perhaps we're doing some Excel CSV type stuff. All right. And Django version is behind. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But it's something that's definitely a good call. So let's put that version in and say that it's behind
315. Yep.
So here I'm going to take a pause because I'm starting to get a little bit of a stack of information that is like, hey, this should be added to the checklist. So, well, we'll finalize our checklist here once we finalize, well, not finalize, but we'll build our initial checklist. Here, sorry, Yes, it is here. We changed this template around. So what I will do is based off of those two things we just added, I'm going to add them here. So I forget the name already. What was that? XLW2. Cool. Like I'm the perfect person to have do this walkthrough because I can't remember anything from like 5 minutes ago or beyond. So it's great. It's literally new to me every time. Let's see here. So the sensitive info stuff, did I put that down there? Nope, I did not. So sensitive data with DOB, look for other things, think about it in transit, rest, and then the Django version is out of date. Yeah. So getting this brainstorming, just so you know, like this is going to be something we continue together. And you typically build out your brainstorming ideas with at least one other person. We did this exercise where we had this at work done with 3 separate people. So the primary person doing the review went to 3 separate people individually, not at once, and brainstormed risks. It turns out literally not one person had the same risks than another person. What does that show us? That shows us that it really is the power of diversity in thought that helps us have the best outcome. So when you brainstorm, what we recommend is, and actually when you do your reviews, it's helpful to pair with other people. I think once upon a time, especially when you start out as a consultant, and you're sort of like your time is your time, it's billable. So you're not typically pulling in other people because they're also billable on their project. You get used to doing things in a silo, but I think that's the worst way to do things. It should be collaborative. And yeah, this is especially like this portion should always be done with someone else, at least one other person. Django versions out. Look up for volumes.
And to feed on that, Ken, right? Like the question that we ask the developers what they're most concerned about, right? That goes straight into this risks section. As a third party, that's where I do it. And then also, I like pulling in another consultant, right? Like as a third party and explaining to them, like having to explain what the application does to solidify that to myself. And then also to ask them what they see that I know that I'm missing, right? So even though it does take up a little bit of time, it's traditionally pretty useful, at least in my experience, to get more eyes on it than less.
Yeah, what's that? There's an upload. What? What?
I don't even know what
is that from? That's awesome. That's interesting. Yeah, so there's an uploads folder under the. I'm just like going through the code right now in case someone's wondering. I'm literally just like looking through just because I'm curious how it's all structured. not going through the code. I'm just looking at the structure is what I mean. I'm just looking at the structure of the app. I know it's weird.
So to call back, Ken, it's just for everybody's like, where are you at in the methodology process in your head then right now?
Yeah, I'm still in the information gathering section. So that's why I don't care too much about looking at routes or like vulnerabilities. I'm really just trying to understand this app better. I've got some initial, obviously I know this is a task manager. So it's probably like some project management. I should probably say task project manager app, right? Seems to do it for whoever wants to do it, both the company that built it as well as the people that sign up and use the service. Got some basic information about if there's this data stored, maybe there's some other interesting things stored. I could go through these models and be exhaustive. We do have to move on. So, because I have to start going into these other sections, but obviously I could sit there and I could go through the models and I can start looking how things are structured and associations and but for now, I'm kind of just
So
being pretty basic here.
Josh did call out upload processing, right? So file uploads, we should add that to the list because we did see that, right? You saw an upload directory. You may as well throw that in there. Oh yeah, you've got upload,
here.
download. Yep. Okay. Just want to make sure it's included.
I just threw that in there because usually like when you see the static folder, it's like, you know, completely public stuff. So I don't know, maybe they've secured it some way, but I don't know, just something to kind of think about. So I'm going to do one more look around here. Okay, so time to start an initial creating initial set of risks. So first thing is let's look for SQL injection. So we know it's Django. Let's look for native queries. That's usually like the way I would search is for like native queries, raw SQL, and it'll give you documentation on that. So as I create my list here, I'm going to look for the various vulnerable methods here. So .raw, I'm going to add them to my checklist of things to search for. Raw. And then I have to look at the MySQL client library as well to see which way, because this is like the default Django stuff, but I want to look at also like MySQL client and see if there's any, you know, functions that has to do should execute. Okay, let's look at that too. Execute. Seems silly, but this is like literally what you do. You just look through documentation and figure out, you know, what stuff's interesting. So MySQL clients, Python, raw queries or native queries, whichever. Is that what it was? Let me go back here to my notes. Yeah, MySQL client. How about this? No. All right.
And if you notice as Ken jumps into this, right, how many dead ends we run into, right? Like you just can't get too frustrated with it. It's all a part of the process, right? Realize that you're gonna. I mean, anybody who searched online knows that that's the case, right? How many times you have to go back to the initial Google search and look from there.
Oh, this is something. Okay. Well, for time's sake, I won't go down this rabbit hole too far, but yeah, I am curious. This is something I would spend a little bit more time on when I don't have such huge time restrictions, or not huge, but some time restrictions. But from my memory, .execute seems like it's usually a pretty good indicator. And we already have that written. So I'm going to just, for now, call that a day on that one. But yes, it's usually a process of maybe mild frustration, but looking through a lot of documentation. So that's the first thing. So MD5, so we need to actually investigate. Usually it's in the settings file for Django. I just happen to know that. Settings.py and models, maybe look at MD5 usage.
Yeah, and Josh, to your point about collaboration, you're right. You know, if we can get multiple people on one of these assessments, that's great. You know, it usually just comes down to who's available and how much time is available to each of them to actually do a code review. Like, a traditional assessment from a third party perspective, I don't have a lot of flexibility in adding multiple people to something because a client isn't necessarily going to pay for that, right? As opposed to internally, it may be a little bit easier.
You might see that I've added a few things here around, what things would be concerning with upload downloads, like permissioning and authorization would be usually a pretty big one. But obviously there's other things like, hey, is it doing zip? Like, can we do like a zip bomb or something funky like that? Is there some compression being done? The actual content, are we like, do we need to scan for viruses? Like, is that something that is within the realm of a concern for us? Where is it being stored? So like location policy around that. I mean, that kind of falls under permission auth maybe, but it's just for kind of just adding stuff here. The size, obviously overly huge files could cause problems. So that's something we want to be cognizant of. Let's see here. So this is actually interesting because with CSV injection, one of the best ways to prevent that is to make sure that the data that people are giving to you isn't just being reflected in, say, one of the columns in the spreadsheet, because you can have like formulas that do things like call out for URLs. I don't know if people knew that, but in Excel, you can definitely have like, it's probably the same in other spreadsheet tech. You can have formulas that do make calls out, and it's like from somebody's machine who just opened the spreadsheet. So something to be cognizant of. I can't talk today. CSV injection. Look at validation and escaping routines. And in a second here, I'm going to open it up for actual brainstorming. This is all built off stuff we've already seen, but I'm going to open it up here in a moment just so that we can all kind of talk through any additional, non-obvious stuff that people want to add. It's usually pretty fun. So sensitive date of birth. Yeah. Look at how DOB is stored and processed. Also, anything else sensitive. Django version's out of date. All right, now that's our kind of basic checklist of risks built off of some brainstorming. The reason we separate this out is oftentimes this conversation will be something you do with colleagues. It's something you'll keep going back to. Maybe I'll even put a delineator of like, showing like, basically this is all the content I've already created a checklist of risks for. Anything that comes after this will be something I don't have a checklist for. And it's just a way to sort of bounce between things to then build like something that you can actually go through and check off, if that makes any sense. So with all that in mind, let's open it up. Are there any risks that people want me to add to this list? All right, so stairs it active. Should we add upload processing to the list? Yes, absolutely. So I kind of have process. It's kind of like both processing and access there. So, but yeah, feel free to just speak up and talk. I'm not required clicking yes, please execute unsafe formulas multiple times, but yeah, it can still happen. Yeah, that's true. I guess that's a fair point. But I can tell you, if you're a consultant and you don't tell your client that they have CSV injection, they're not going to care about that stuff. They're going to be upset at you that you didn't call it out. Ask me how I know. Okay.
This is a side comment, but I feel like this might help people with understanding the reports that we get from pen tests that come in terms of like, why did they tell us about this thing, that maybe we don't think is a big risk. But when you're doing these kinds of assessments, yeah, you want to give the client like as much information as you can if you're identifying problems. Sorry, over to Josh.
I see Josh Nichols raised. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just skimming the repo and I did see there's a VTM Nginx config, which I thought was interesting. And it has like, I don't know, it had like home directory paths and ECT user and a bunch of control headers. Yeah. I don't think we've seen anything with like, yeah, that level of web server config. And that was actually something I was curious about in general of like, well, what point do we consider like, SSL and like HTTPS? So when I was working at GitHub, I know that there's a lot of care around, the cryptography used there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, interesting stuff here too. Oh, yeah. That's not great. Allow origin.
But maybe this is just development. Maybe
totally
this is just
safe.
development. It's totally fine, right?
Well, but you bring up a good point, Josh, because and same with Justin is like when I see it, right, as a third party, I pull up a file like this and I feel obligated to at least look at it. And if I see anything, to note it, even if it is just development, right? Because I don't have the full context, and I'm going to let your team, when I release that report, actually make that call. It's not up to necessarily me as a reviewer to disassociate or like declassify the risk of something if the risk is there. It's better to have a discussion about it. And like you could ask, right? Like, hey, I see these Nginx files. Are those in scope? Should I be worried about those? If I don't have access to the developers to ask those questions, then I'm just going to add it to the report just to be safe, because I don't want it to bite me further down the road where they come to me and be like, hey, we had this like open port and we got completely owned because of it. Why didn't you call this out? Right? And I have no answer for that other than, well, I thought it didn't matter. It's just not good enough, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I had another thing I just spotted. In like static JS, like there's like jQuery files kicking around, and it's like 1.8 and 1.10, which I just Googled quickly, and the latest is 3.0, 3 point something. So that's suspect. And that's maybe totally all the dependencies that are there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of falls into this. Yeah, you're right, though. This is actually something that is considered a third-party component as well. So, it's something to absolutely note. The reason I would note it in both places is like, even if I go down here and put it in the risks or brainstorming risks, that's great. But I want to have it documented also, like that there's these third-party components that are being used that might be unsafe. The reason is I will at some point double, triple, and quadruple back through all of this to make sure and look at my notes again to make sure that I've caught everything that could potentially be a risk to the application or a significant risk to the application. So I like to put all this stuff, even if I've put a little thing down here on brainstorming of risks, I like to put it up in my data up here. So information gathering data, jQuery is outdated.
It looks like Bootstrap's pretty old also.
So then here, I go down and I say, look at and analyze the Nginx config where we have allow origins wildcard stuff going on. Check out jQuery Bootstrap versions for phones. And by the way, this is something that we get asked a lot, so I figure I'll just cover it preemptively. If something is like an outdated version, we're not necessarily going to sit there and try and look at like, okay, well, they said this version of jQuery has this vulnerability, so let's test if this thing is vulnerable to that thing that they say, it's vulnerable to. No, we're just going to say like, it's an outdated version, upgrade it because like there's CVs associated with it and move on. Otherwise, it's like kind of a massive waste of our time. in a sense. So
there have been a couple of things now that you mentioned. One of you mentioned, hey, we just put in the report because, it's not up to us to make the ultimate risk call there. Do you ever get pushback from people being like, you gave me this mountain of paper?
Oh, no.
Yes.
I mean, I don't.
No.
I don't. No, because I've never had anyone complain that I've given them too much paperwork. I've only had the other way where people complain that like vulns didn't get found or they weren't listed. Because, like, for instance, let me give you a perfect concrete example. One of the most annoying ones that ever hit me was there was a cookie. It was a completely useless cookie, had no value to it whatsoever. Honestly, it was garbage. But somebody at Fishnet, where Seth and I both worked at, decided to write up every single finding that they had. Didn't matter if there was any risk associated with it. And to be clear, we're not saying that you just put in stuff without considering the risk. We're just saying that sometimes if the risk is iffy, we're going to put it in there anyways, because I'd rather than not know. Having said that, this person said, hey, this has a lack of secure or HTTP only flag on it in their previous report. So we came back 6 months later, did a retest, and they were actually very upset that I didn't mark this cookie as having HTTP only. Well, why didn't I put that in the report? It's because the cookie really shouldn't even been there to begin with. It didn't do anything. It shouldn't even have been there. It was the silliest thing ever, but believe it or not, somebody got upset about that. So Seth, it sounds like you have people that have complained about having too much information about their app.
Yeah, I mean, the pushback I really get is, your risk classifications are all over the board, right? And we have discussions with developers up front about, we base risk on what we see with the application, what we see with the code, and like this risk list that we came up with as far as threats go. We will try to use CVSS version 3.1 to classify things, but the risk in the report is just the risk from our small snippet. And they'll come back and be like, well, bug bounty taxonomy says that this should be a medium or this should be a low. And we're like, okay, that's great if that's what the taxonomy that you're following, and we can update that. But that's more of the pushback that I get is there's items that are in here that are, interesting, but like the risk is wrong. And like I always tell them that they've got to do their own risk classification based on what they know of the application and the environment. Because if you work with it, they're the ones that have more information than we do, and that's completely fine. As far as the number of items, what I'll often see is that pushback that, oh, well, we've got to get this to a bank to show that we're doing some sort of secure code review. Can you classify that as a low? Which means, oh, we're going to give them this and then put it on the backlog and never work on it, right?
I've seen a lot
more
of.
What I get. Yeah.
Yep. That I've seen a lot of, where they're like annoyed that they've got 5 mediums and a high or something, and they're like, well, now we have to explain it to somebody, and it's like not a clean, just bill of health for our customers or whatever reason that they've got, and that stinks. But yeah, I forgot about that, Seth. And then you have to like go back in and do an exec summary change where it's like, well, they did have these findings, but like they're good now, and then somebody's happy, and it's just
it's
ask me why I don't do consulting,
right? Yeah. You have different reasons why organizations do a penetration test, right? And Carla's speaking to that as well, right? There's different reasons, and it becomes obvious quickly whether or not an organization is looking for actual security recommendations to fix it versus, wow, a bank just came and said we had to do this, so I want a clean bill of health, and I'm going to push back so it's as little work for us as possible in order to get through this hurdle. And then granted, there's like a sliding scale there, but you would be surprised at the number of those that we get in where it's just hey, I need a compliance check for this. And I'm like, well, that's great, but I'm still going to put actionable items in the report, and I'm still going to rate it as I do, as if you want to take security seriously and make you push back on that. But that's just, my personal preference. So,
is there a hand raised, or Or
Yes, Sentil, you had a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So with regard to the vulnerability scanning for dependencies or third-party libraries, right? Do you recommend tools for running for scanning them, or like when you're generating the report, what is your information that you put? Hey, can you guys just run these, run your code through these scanning tools, or you actually do it? Like, what's the what's the practice that you guys normally follow?
Ken, what do you want to say on that? So the first thing is I would recommend, right? Like, so if you're using GitHub, you've got Dependabot that's there that should already be scanning. If I'm doing it with a third-party tool, I'm probably using dependency check or npm audit, right? Or like depending on the language and framework, Sneak if I have access to it, right? And then I will list out the vulnerable dependencies in the report and then tell them what I ran so that they can re-implement that themselves. I would rather them be able to do it than me just do it by myself.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to figure out. So yeah, I used a Dependabot. In the past, I've used dependency check as well. I've not used Sneak too much, but dependency check from OWASP, I've used a bunch. To be honest with you, though, like I guess nothing's perfect is the answer that I hate to say, but like, I don't know. Dependabot's become my like go-to, but again, I don't think anything's perfect. And as I don't want to talk too much about it, but we're going into one of the package ecosystems, trying to like go deeper right now internally at work for research to figure out how we can better depend upon it. It doesn't work for all my Gradle projects. I'm sure it doesn't, but that's when you should use dependency check. Dependency check's built for like, I know for a fact that Java is a big part of dependency check. So you should give that a shot for sure. It's actually pretty easy to run. Yeah. Yep. Yes, that's the one.
And then Josh, you had something else you wanted to.
Yeah, I had one other I just was noticing. It was in the static folder, and I saw that there's fonts, and like I just tickled something in the back of my mind. I remember at some point there being like font related vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, there are. Yeah.
And then this is old, like because it's the jQuery is that like a fine vintage, we'll say.
It ages well. Yeah.
It ages well. It is ages. But like that made me remind me of that, and just like Googled very quickly, and it was like, yeah, this jQuery was like 2012, 2010 ish, and like those the font vulns were like 2015, and there's different ones for different operating systems.
I'm just adding that. Let me just make sure. Okay, I don't see any more hands up. So I'm going to move on to some new things. Moving past the brainstorming, obviously this is like a very condensed version of all this stuff. So I did while we were talking, I did dump out some of the the URLs. So I did the show URLs thing where it's like manage Pi show URLs. And I dumped this out, and we're going to prioritize. This is where we're going to discuss prioritizing these routes for review. But before we get there, there's still a couple things that we have to remember to do. So one of them is we're still looking at how routing occurs, right? Remember that routing from a route perspective, we know that this is Django, so it's going to have a urls.py file, right? So in Django, we know that it's not going to have any verbs, and it is going to be regex based. So it's something to consider. We've got our routes here, but we also see that there's this admin site URLs. So there's two interesting things here, I guess what I'm trying to say. There is a route that's defined here, which is great, but then there is like obviously a set of URLs that belong to the main task manager like endpoints. So HTTP path / task manager / something is going to default to this task manager URL file. So that's something we need to look at. And then separately, there's this admin site URLs, which does look to be taken from Django contrib. like I'm saying that because obviously admin is this admin object here, and that originates from this. So there's a Django contrib admin library. We would put this in our notes as a component, the Django admin docs. Cool. So it basically looks to be a built-in administrative set of permissions and probably some web interface as well. So let me go ahead into our notes real quick and mention that. So we have to go back up to the technology stack real quick. And this is going to be something you just keep doing where it's like, hey, I found something else. So yeah, let's see here. Django contrib admin is used for administrative functionality. Cool. Just something I want to note. I can go ahead and add a checklist item for that. And then, like I said, we want to look at this task manager URLs file. You can see that looks to be where the bulk of our oh, interesting. So yeah, you got download and upload. So we've got all the registration authentication style stuff like change password, login, log out, profile changes. Here are the stuff to manage projects. Here are the URLs to manage tasks, notes. Ooh, that's all very interesting stuff. Let's take a look at that. That's going to be something I prioritize. So in brainstorming of risks, looks to be some juicy debug endpoints we should check out. Now, I noticed that yesterday y'all were putting in, or at least a couple of people put in links that were permalinks. I highly recommend doing that. I don't have Atom up, but I have this plugin for Atom where I can actually right click on this line and it'll give me the permalink as it is on GitHub. And I like to give links to that in my notes and in my write-ups when I point to the vulnerable code. I like to give permalinks to where the code's vulnerable. That's just sort of like a pro tip I'm throwing in there for you all. But these ones need to be prioritized. So I'm going to find these because that's something we're about to do. Sorry, there we go. So settings is interesting. And put that at the top. And so is debug. Wow, that's not in my, oh, it was ping that was, yeah, it was ping that was part of that. And that's going to go to the top. So what I'm about to do is start prioritizing routes. So I'm going to create a high priority routes. This is when you don't have time. All right. This is where it becomes like, hey, remember we said there are going to be times where you have to do things in a less than ideal way. This is the less than ideal way. I mean, it's not horrible, but when you have to prioritize, you got to prioritize. So it is what it is. We're going to find, and I'm going to explain here shortly how I prioritize these things. The reason I say debug, usually debug is just fraught with peril. So anything built for debugging is often very scary. So I immediately kind of put that at the top. Anything that's authentication related. So any change password, forgot password, anything like that, I'm going to put into the high priority of routes. Now, if we had more time, I would even at this stage with the URLs, I'd make sure that this regex makes sense. I'd do a little bit of digging into what options are available and making sure that whatever, whatever regex is used actually makes sense throughout all of this. Because there's a lot of regex, as you can see, throughout these route definitions. But the next thing is we have to figure out authorization decorators. So we have to kind of figure out where is all this stuff happening? Where's the logic processing happening? And as we look through, we can see there's a lot of calls to views dot whatever. So what does views stand for? Well, from task manager, import views. So I'm going to say it's probably this file here, which does look to be pretty large, pretty much what we're looking for. So now I could use what is it called, semgrep, to quickly ascertain all of the decorators that are being applied. But again, for brevity of time, I'm just going to look through it with y'all initially, just kind of skim here. Looks like @login required is something that we're using as a decorator for authorization. Skimming, looking. So far, there's one other thing at user passes test as well. So I'm not going to create an exhaustive list right now. I'm just going to put a couple of these in and show you what I would do to figure out what those are. So, all right. So the first thing I'm going to do is obviously Google. Yay. Well, I can see it already comes out with that. So looks like it's using a Django. So login required decorator. So it's a built-in decorator to Django contrib auth decorators. Let's look in views.py. Yep. Okay. Oh, yeah, there you go. Excuse me. It's using two separate decorators, user passes test and login required. And login required is only making sure that you are logged in. That's it. That's not much of an authorization check. So something to be something that I need to be like pretty aware of. So I'm actually going to create a note here. Only checks for a session, but not who you are. So, or not like true authorization. How about that? And this needs to be something we add up to the top now as a risk. Make sure at login required is used sanely. Cool. So what I'll do there is actually go through and make sure and look at each route and make sure that where it's applied, like it actually should be applied. And also I noticed that there was like an at login required, sorry, where there was a at login required, there was also, oh, I'm looking in the wrong file. Yeah, there was also like, so I don't know if these need to be back to back like that. You know, it's kind of weird. I would think that this would handle both, but I don't really know enough about, believe it or not, I'm not like an expert in Django. So I actually don't know if those need to be stacked like that. It's more of a question mark for me. So I'm going to actually add that as something that's interesting. So right now, we're to the point where we've identified at least some initial, things about the application in terms of like its authorization decorators. So now we're going to get into just real quick mapping files. Can anyone give me one of the most significant like configuration files in Django? Just shout it out or type it in.
Maybe URLs?
URLs we just looked at.
Settings.
Settings.
Yeah, there you go. Settings.py. So yes, and there's like clearly some interesting stuff immediately that we see here. VTM RDP. Cool. And here's that simple format thing without the ASCII time. So we already like just in the 2 seconds we're looking at the settings file, some interesting things. What I'll do is I'm not going to go down. The reason I like to show this is it's very easy to be like, okay, right now, like we got to dig in. Let's like start listing out all these vulnerabilities. Absolutely not. Like just make a note. This thing seems super insecure, has a secret key, debug is on, simple logging doesn't have a time, etc. So let's spend some quality time with this file. So, and the reason is because like you can get off track very quickly. We don't want to get off track. We want all this stuff to be very methodical, very systematic. Okay, so we've just real quickly, we've looked at some of the routes and how they're defined. We've looked at the authorization decorators. We've done our information gathering. We've got a little bit of like our files that are interesting. I would probably add to this Josh Nichols recommendation around Nginx and all of that to this specifically to this section. as something I want to validate and take a look at. And I might refer back up to my brainstorming checklist to see like what I was trying to look at inside of there. What was the risk? Why did we put it on there? And so that's where we're at now. Now we want to do the source to sink trace where we look at end to end. Where does data come in and where's the last place it gets executed and processed? But to do that, we actually have to decide like what we care about. Well, for today, I don't care about any of this admin stuff. It's built in. I will, obviously, I'm not saying that's not important. Of course, I would look at this, but for today, I'm going to clean up this route list by just removing all the admin stuff since it is default Django contrib admin stuff. But again, that is not me saying it doesn't pose risk. That's just me saying it's not super interesting for the purposes of this exercise. Yeah, index isn't super interesting. The things I'm going to say are super higher priority right now are going to be upload, change password, download. Yeah, so that is interesting. Change, let's see here. Upload and change password. And those are interesting because the risk is pretty significant if they're done incorrectly. All right, forgot password. So in case you're wondering, like, why am I looking at these things? It's because like if authentication or authorization or file uploads or places where doing SQL queries, if those things are done incorrectly, there's fairly dire consequences. So we know for a fact those are very high priority to look at. And then for medium range stuff would be like a lot of the CRUD operations around these tasks, notes, and projects, because, you know, you might have insecure direct object reference where you can, you know, change the number in the URL and you're able to see somebody else's project or notes or something like that. And there's an authorization flaw. You know, so that's pretty medium risk at that point. It's not remote code execution. It's not injection where you can steal the database or get a reverse shell. It's not anything like that. It's just sort of like a risk to the data itself. Okay, so I'm going to leave this stuff under medium for now and go into low priority thing. Now, the other thing I want to add for risks, just so, because again, I know we're bouncing back and forth. That's actually going to happen a lot. We need to look at also OS level commands that might be a problem. So OS commands in Python. And I know we're 6 minutes away, so I'm cognizant of the time. I'm watching that for those following along. All right, so sorry. So really, it looks like from what I've seen, just from an early, it all seems to be pretty dependent on OS. So I'm going to say if like, because it's like I think os.system, os.exec, those things are pretty. I don't think I would go into someone's random blog, but whatever. I would look OS system, subprocess. So subprocess is another one. So I'm going to look for those libraries, actually, believe it or not. I'm going to look for, I opened the wrong thing. I'm going to look for import of OS and subprocess. So these are things I need to actually look for in the code base to find like system commands. Now, just real quickly, I want to trace one route. We're going to do the, normally I'd open it up to everybody to choose the route, but we're a little bit short on time. So I'm going to go into this. Seth, which one of these 3 debug ones do you think is more fun?
Ping.
What is it? Ping?
Ping. Yeah. Pick the ping
Okay.
one. That'll be good.
Task manager views pings. Okay. So no, it's under views. Sorry. Ping. Oh, well, that's another authorization decorator I wasn't aware of. Okay, so I actually have to add that to. So if you see, remember, CSRF token protections are an authorization check. So I would definitely want to know, like, I'm guessing CSRF exempt. Yep. Okay. So if you see that, it's probably vulnerable to CSRF. So first of all, we know that has no CSRF protections on it. This is what I was talking about, where the HTTP verb has kind of like a conditional inside of the function instead of being defined at the route level, which is, in my opinion, a better and easier pattern to follow, but whatever, we'll go with this. This is awesome. So there's some regex checks. So it looks like there's a parameter called IP, some regex checks. If we match on those, then that's a nice try. But then we take the command and we, so yeah, that's funny. So as soon as you, so like basically we interpolate their command into this. So as long as we don't use these commands, it looks like we're maybe fine, or maybe there's a way around these actually. That regex is suspect to begin with. So it may not be a correctly formed regex anyways. So you might be able to bypass that regex, or, just put in something different over here in the command. And then I see the subprocess get output. I'm guessing subprocess.get output is probably some form of command injection. And I want to make sure that nobody loses sight of this other thing. By the way, I would be taking notes on all this, of course. I would go back up to the route and put like a few things. So I'd put like, I'd probably put like, check the regex for matching on dangerous commands, subprocess dot get output. Like, I don't know anything about that. What is it? Then we have to look at the actual, I have to wait for the Zoom bar to move. I hate, Zoom chat is so hard. I don't know why it's so hard for me. Okay, moved it. So then I just want to make sure nobody loses sight of this last piece, which is it is rendering something, right? So we actually do have to wait. Oh, by the way, I just realized that's, oh no, okay, cool. So I do want to look at this file here. It's going to put in data, which is I guess the result of running this command, and it's going to give it a data variable that has that content. So like, I'm guessing if you did that ping and the system has like the response, the 4 pings, and it gives you that output, it probably is just like putting that on the page. So let's go to task manager ping. Okay. Now, another thing I want you to not lose sight of is that if you are ever including this, usually the templates are including files from somewhere else. You want to make sure you look at those files. We've seen certainly many times cases where there's like 4,000 cross-site scripting results from a scanner or something like that, like meaning like a dynamic running scanner. And the reason is that in one place there was a vulnerability and everywhere was extending or including that templated, like, I don't know, header HTML that was vulnerable to XSS. So like literally every page is vulnerable to XSS. That's happened over and over and over again. So now we know we're using HTML templating. So we need to go back to our risks and say, hey, sorry. We can put it up there in the brainstorming of risks, but I'm just going to put a checklist item since we need to look at unsafe HTML operations in this templating language. It's a default Django language. So let me see, Django unsafe. I know we're just about there, so I'm just gonna go like just finish this out and then we're done. Django unsafe HTML methods. Or how about this? XSS in Django. Oh, okay. So another way to do this is to go in and say unescape HTML Django template and go to the documentation and look for, of course, it's not gonna, am I even looking at the right documentation? Probably not. What do we usually escape Django HTML template? I forget. It's like
safe or auto escape. There you go. Built-in template tags and filters.
It's in the actual Django template language. documentation.
First result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So auto
right
escape
there.
being off would be, but this isn't actually what oh, wait, what? Oh, I didn't even know that existed. Seth, that's interesting.
Yep. Yeah, there's more.
Huh.
There's more there than that. Yeah, if you look for the safe, yeah. Just look for safe. There you go.
Yeah, it's this. Oh, it escape too, huh? Escape and safe filters not acceptable arguments. Instead, use auto escape.
So I think
there's
that's
probably been
new
some
in 3.2.
documentation. Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, what is going on? Okay, the documentation's changed since our last time we gave this class. That's interesting. Cool. New stuff. It's exciting. So I would kind of go through this and figure it all out and figure out like what all would be scary and something to look for. But for now, we'll just say usually it's much quicker because it's different documentation. That's interesting. Cool. And auto escape off. Okay, so just real quick to finish this out, let's look for safe. Don't see safe anywhere in there. What about auto escape? Or how about just escape? This escape word used. Nope. Okay. Then we need to go to whatever it's including. Let me see if at the bottom it's including anything else. No. Oh, and there's where the data is actually being rendered. Okay, so let's look at backend. There we go. Let's look for escape. No escape. Safe. We see one. So if I had XSS in my my username, looks like I would immediately be vulnerable on every file that extends this base backend HTML, which is probably most views. And at this point, I'll just list it. Now, that kind of brings us to the last part here, which I'm not really going to walk through. There's no need to. We've just spent all of yesterday talking about it. But if you go back up, note this is where you start to build out your various authentication, authorization, auditing, logging, injection, cryptography, configuration, all of that, as well as any checklists that are specific to your business. So specific things in their apps that are there, known to be vulnerable to, or could be an issue, or are like anytime we find something that's happened more than a couple times in our bug bounty program, we add it to our checklist. And this is where you're going to take your own business checklist as well and add them in. So at this point, what we've done is we've gone through, we've done all of the information gathering. We've done the mapping portions. We've looked at like, what are the main configuration files to review and jotted those down. We've listed out some brainstorming of risks. We've given, we've sorted our routes by high priority, medium priority, low priority. Yeah, that's sort of and then just real quick, before we go, one thing I want to mention about the routes. So I think it's very important to do a source to sink mapping of routes, all of that. However, there are going to be times where that's completely impossible. So an example of that is when someone that says, hey, like, we're just going to run this through a scanner and I need you to just look through the results. That happens. In that case, you don't really have the luxury of looking through all of these routes. You may not even have the ability to even map out the routes and you're only looking at results. If you're going to do that, the only thing that you need to remember is that this section from behavior, tech stack, brainstorming of risks and risks, those cannot be skipped over. If you don't understand, these are all about context. And so if you skip past the things that give you context, those result findings are going to mean nothing. So you can omit the mapping of routes. You can certainly do that. But just make sure you don't omit the information gathering portion. So anyways.